The nurse's voice cracked with urgency as she rushed past the recovery chairs, phone pressed to her ear. Tell the OR we found a match. Walk-in donor, type AB negative, get the transfusion moving now. Rachel Kim barely registered the words, still pressing a cotton ball to the crook of her elbow, filling out routine paperwork after donating blood at her school's community drive. AB negative was her blood type. Rare enough that she'd been asked to donate twice a year for as long as she could remember. Rare enough that the nurse's urgency snagged her attention despite her own lightheaded exhaustion. Is someone okay? Rachel asked, mostly out of reflexive concern, expecting a vague, reassuring non-answer. The nurse paused just long enough to look at her properly. A patient came in critical 2 hours ago. We were almost out of options. Your donation might have saved his life. Rachel felt a small, quiet warmth at that, the ordinary satisfaction of routine kindness landing somewhere it mattered, and went back to her paperwork expecting nothing more from the moment. 10 minutes later, a hospital security officer approached her table with careful, deliberate politeness. Miss Kim? Could you step into a private room for a moment? Someone would like a word. Rachel followed, curiosity outweighing the faint unease prickling at the back of her neck. The private room was small, sparse, and occupied by 2 more security officers standing unusually alert near the door. More security than she'd ever seen accompany a simple thank you. The patient who received your donation, the first officer said carefully, is a man named Dominic Carbone. Something shifted in the room the instant he said the name. A stiffness in the officer's posture, a tension Rachel couldn't quite place but felt immediately, viscerally, the way you feel a room's temperature drop before you understand why. I don't know that name, Rachel admitted. You will, the officer said not unkindly, if you stick around Philadelphia long enough. 3 days later, once Dominic Carbone was lucid enough to receive visitors, he insisted, against his own doctor's mild objection, on thanking Rachel personally. She found herself standing at his hospital bedside, flanked by armed men positioned with unmistakable purpose near the door, looking at a composed, dangerous-looking stranger whose eyes tracked her with an intensity that had nothing to do with simple gratitude. You didn't ask who I was before you decided to help, he said, voice still rough from surgery. Most people, once they learn who they've helped, either run or start calculating what they can get from it. You did neither. I didn't know who you were, Rachel said honestly. I still don't, not really. You will, he said, echoing the security officer's earlier words. And I need you to know something before that happens. Whatever you learn about me, the reason this room has armed men in it, none of it changes what you did. You saved my life. I don't forget that, regardless of what comes next. Rachel left the hospital that afternoon with a strange, unsettled feeling she couldn't fully name. Gratitude tangled with something closer to warning, though she had no idea yet how literally that warning would prove true. Rachel Kim was 27 years old, and the small, steady life she'd built as a 5th-grade teacher at a public elementary school in Philadelphia's Fishtown neighborhood represented everything she'd worked toward since her own difficult, unstable childhood. She lived alone in a modest apartment 2 blocks from the school, rent manageable on a teacher's salary only through careful, constant budgeting. Her father had struggled with addiction throughout Rachel's early years, in and out of her life in ways that left her raised primarily by an aunt who did her best but had 5 other kids of her own to worry about. Rachel had put herself through college on scholarships and part-time work, emerging with a fierce, hard-won commitment to stability, to being, for her students, the kind of steady, dependable presence she'd rarely had herself growing up. Her financial pressure was constant but manageable. Student loans she was slowly paying down, a modest emergency fund she guarded carefully, and a standing, private commitment to covering school supplies for the handful of students in her class whose families couldn't afford them, an expense she never mentioned to anyone, including her own aunt. Her personal goal, held close and rarely discussed, was to eventually earn her master's in education, moving toward a role where she could shape curriculum and mentor newer teachers, though tuition costs kept that goal perpetually a few years away. Her emotional wound ran deep and specific. She'd grown up watching adults make promises they couldn't keep, learning early that trust, once broken, rarely rebuilt itself easily. She'd built her adult life around the opposite instinct, being exactly as reliable as she said she'd be, showing up consistently for the kids in her classroom in a way nobody had consistently shown up for her. Her moral boundary was simple and unbending. She helped when help was needed without calculating the cost or asking questions first, because hesitating to help while gathering more information had always struck her since childhood as its own kind of quiet cruelty, the difference between people who acted and people who found reasons not to. Her practical skill, sharpened through years of managing a classroom of 25 9-year-olds, was reading people quickly and accurately, who was struggling silently, who needed a moment of individual attention, who was putting on a brave face over something considerably harder underneath. It was a skill she'd never thought to value outside her classroom walls. The recurring object she carried, tucked into her bag on donation days out of long habit, was a small enamel pin shaped like a blood drop, given to her years ago by the hospital's donor coordinator after her 10th donation. A small, slightly silly token that had become, over years of regular giving, a quiet source of pride. The week before the community blood drive, Rachel had spent her own money she genuinely couldn't spare, replacing a broken pair of glasses for a student whose family had been quietly struggling since a recent layoff, telling the boy it was a school donation program, rather than let him know the truth and feel the weight of charity. Nobody had asked her to do that. She'd done it because watching a 9-year-old squint at the board, too proud or scared to tell anyone why, felt like exactly the kind of small failure of attention she'd promised herself she'd never allow in her own classroom. That same instinct, automatic, unglamorous, entirely without calculation, was exactly what sent her rolling up her sleeve at the community blood drive that Saturday morning, giving without a second thought toward who might eventually receive it. Standing in Dominic Carbone's hospital room 3 days later, surrounded by armed men whose presence made the sterile air feel suddenly much heavier, Rachel understood she'd stepped, without any intention at all, into something considerably larger than a routine donation. "I don't want anything for this," she told him when he offered, gently but directly, to cover her lost work hours and any inconvenience the donation had caused her. "I gave blood because someone needed it. That's not a transaction." "Most people don't turn down compensation," Dominic said, something like genuine surprise crossing his controlled expression. "I'm not most people," Rachel said, and had no idea yet how true that observation would prove, or how much danger her simple, unthinking generosity was about to draw toward the careful, steady life she'd built. Dominic Carbone was discharged from the hospital 8 days later, and true to his word he sought Rachel out again, not through a hospital visit this time, but waiting outside her school at the end of a Thursday afternoon, dressed carefully enough that several parents in the pickup line gave him a second, curious glance. "You didn't have to come here," Rachel said, unsettled by the sight of him standing near the school's entrance, though something in his careful, deliberate stance suggested he'd chosen this public, ordinary location precisely to seem less threatening. "I wanted to thank you properly," Dominic said. "Not from a hospital bed surrounded by armed men. Somewhere closer to your actual life." "You're still surrounded by at least 2 men in that black car," Rachel pointed out, glancing toward the discreetly parked vehicle at the curb. "Old habits," Dominic admitted, something almost sheepish in his controlled expression. "I'm working on it." Rachel studied him, composed, careful, radiating an authority that felt entirely out of place against the backdrop of an elementary school pickup line. "Why does a simple thank you require this much security?" "Because the reason I needed your blood in the first place wasn't an accident," Dominic said quietly. "Someone shot me. My family has interests across the city. Some of them entirely legitimate, some of them considerably older and more complicated than that." Rachel's stomach tightened. "Mafia," she said, the word landing flatly between them. "That's the word people use," Dominic said, not denying it. Every rational instinct told Rachel to end this conversation immediately, to retreat into the safety of her ordinary, careful life and never think about Dominic Carbone again. But something about his directness, offered without excuse, without minimizing what it meant, kept her rooted where she stood. "Why tell me the truth?" she asked. "You could have made up something simpler." "Because you already gave me something honest without asking a single question first," Dominic said. "Lying to you now would just be an insult to that." Something in his answer disarmed her more than she expected. "I appreciate the honesty," she said carefully. "But I don't want to be involved in whatever world comes with it. I gave blood. That's where my involvement ends." "I understand completely," Dominic said. "I'm not here to change that. I'm here because I wanted you to know exactly who you helped, and to offer you something in return if you'll accept it." I already told the hospital I didn't want compensation. I remember, Dominic said. I'm not offering money. I'm offering to cover any lost pay from your donation day formally, through the hospital's own donor program, not from me directly. If that still feels like too much, I understand. Rachel considered it, surprised by the careful respect in how he'd framed the offer. Not a grand, public gesture, but something modest, official, easy to decline without awkwardness. That's actually reasonable, she admitted. I'm trying, Dominic said, something almost like humor threading through his controlled voice. I don't get a lot of practice at reasonable. Their conversation was interrupted by one of the men from the black car, approaching with visible urgency, phone in hand. Mr. Carbone. We need to move. Now. Dominic's expression shifted instantly, controlled warmth replaced by sharp, immediate alertness. What is it? Surveillance flagged a vehicle circling the block twice in the last 10 minutes. Tinted windows, no plates visible. Rachel felt her pulse spike, adrenaline cutting through her earlier composure. Is that dangerous? It might be nothing, Dominic said, though his tightened jaw suggested he didn't believe that. But I'd rather be cautious. Get inside your school, Rachel. Don't linger out here. Rachel hesitated, torn between her instinct to retreat and a sharper, more unsettling instinct that refused to simply walk away without understanding what was actually happening. Is this about the shooting? About whoever hurt you? Possibly, Dominic admitted. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily. But I also don't want to lie to you about the risk. You're not making the case for staying uninvolved very well, Rachel said, though there was less accusation in her voice than genuine, unsettled curiosity. No, Dominic agreed, something grim in his expression. I suppose I'm not. The black car pulled away moments later, tires screeching softly against the curb, and Rachel stood alone at the school's entrance, watching it disappear around the corner, understanding with sudden, uneasy clarity that whatever she'd stepped into by rolling up her sleeve at a routine blood drive, it was far from finished. The tinted window car returned 4 days later, not circling this time, but parked directly across from Rachel's school for nearly 20 minutes during afternoon pickup, long enough that another teacher mentioned it to the school's front office before Rachel even noticed it herself. She called the number Dominic had left with her, hands unsteady. There's a car outside my school. The same kind you mentioned before. Dominic's response was immediate, sharp with alarm. Don't go near the windows. I'm sending someone to check the plates and confirm you're safe. Dominic, this is my school. There are children here. I know, he said, and the genuine urgency in his voice was unmistakable. That's exactly why I need you to stay calm and stay inside until I understand what's happening. Within the hour, Dominic's men confirmed the vehicle belonged to an associate of Salvatore Carbone, Dominic's own cousin, a man Rachel had never heard of but whose name, spoken aloud in Dominic's office later that evening, visibly darkened his expression. My cousin, Dominic explained, his composure fraying at the edges. He's been positioning himself for control of certain family interests for years. If his people are watching you, it means someone believes you saw something the night I was shot. Something that could connect Salvatore to it directly. I don't remember seeing anything, Rachel said. I wasn't even there. I was at a blood drive. I know, Dominic said. But someone clearly believes otherwise, and that makes you a target regardless of what you actually remember. The external consequence of Dominic's growing attention arrived swiftly. His aunt, Isabella, Salvatore's own mother, caught in the uncomfortable middle of a family fracturing in real time, confronted Dominic directly at a family gathering, visibly alarmed by rumors already spreading. You're putting a schoolteacher in danger, Isabella said, cornering him privately. A stranger, Dominic. Over what? Gratitude. This isn't how this family handles things. This family's handling of things is exactly what got me shot in the first place, Dominic said, voice tight with controlled frustration. I'm not interested in repeating whatever mistake led to that. You're implicating your own cousin. I'm investigating who tried to kill me, Dominic said. If that implicates Salvatore, that's not my doing. That's his. The warning Isabella hadn't quite spoken aloud proved prophetic within days. Rachel's apartment building lost power one evening. An isolated outage, her building alone, no explanation offered by the utility company when she called to report it. She sat in her dark apartment, adrenaline prickling through exhausted nerves, and called Dominic before she'd fully decided to. My building just lost power. Only my building as far as I can tell. Don't stay there tonight, Dominic said, his voice instantly sharp with alarm. I'm sending a car. Dominic, I have school in the morning. I can't just disappear into hiding. I'm not asking you to disappear, Dominic said. I'm asking you to let me keep you safe while I figure out exactly how much danger you're actually in. You keep your job. Your apartment key. Your life stays yours. I just need you somewhere secure until I understand this fully. Rachel sat in the dark, weighing genuine fear against her fierce reluctance to let a stranger's world reshape her carefully built, independent life. One condition, she said finally. I keep teaching. No exceptions. My students need consistency, and I'm not interested in being the kind of adult who disappears on them without explanation. Agreed, Dominic said without hesitation. Whatever you need. She packed a small bag under the watchful eye of Dominic's driver 20 minutes later, her enamel blood drop pin tucked carefully into her coat pocket out of habit rather than any particular reasoning, and didn't look back at the apartment she'd called home for 4 years. The following morning, arriving at school under quiet, discreet security she'd insisted remain invisible to her students, Rachel found herself unexpectedly calm, steadied by the familiar routine of her classroom despite everything shifting around its edges. Dominic visited that afternoon, ostensibly to check on the security arrangements, though Rachel suspected the visit carried more personal weight than he was willing to admit outright. You seem remarkably composed for someone whose apartment lost power under suspicious circumstances less than 24 hours ago, he observed, watching her grade papers at her classroom desk after the last student had left. I've spent my whole life staying steady for other people, Rachel said. It's not composure exactly. It's just practice. That's not nothing, Dominic said quietly. Most people I know don't have that kind of practice. Most people you know haven't had to, Rachel said, something gentler than accusation in her voice. Dominic was quiet a moment, something shifting behind his careful expression. No, he admitted. They haven't. Whatever careful distance either of them had maintained since the hospital room felt, in that quiet classroom moment, considerably thinner than it had been a week earlier. The protected townhouse where Rachel now stayed, discreetly guarded but otherwise unremarkable from the outside, became over the following days less a temporary safe house and more a strange, complicated second home neither of them fully acknowledged out loud. Scene 1 came on a quiet morning, practical and immediate. Rachel found Dominic in the kitchen before dawn, attempting, with visible frustration, to prepare something resembling a proper breakfast. You've burned that twice already, she said, taking the pan from him gently. I'm not used to mornings without staff handling this, Dominic admitted, something almost sheepish in his controlled expression. I forget how many ordinary things I've outsourced over the years. That sounds lonely, Rachel said, working the eggs with practiced efficiency. I hadn't thought of it that way, Dominic said, studying her with genuine consideration. Maybe it is. Scene 2 arrived 3 days later, an argument sharper than either expected. Dominic announced over a tense dinner that he wanted to add a second security detail specifically for Rachel's classroom, positioned discreetly among school staff. Absolutely not, Rachel said immediately. I agreed to protection outside school hours. Adding armed security inside my classroom crosses a line I'm not willing to cross, for my students' sake if nothing else. Rachel, if Salvatore's people are watching your school, then we address that specific risk directly, but you don't get to keep expanding what protection means every time you get nervous, she said, voice rising with genuine frustration. I have spent my whole life being the reliable, steady adult in that classroom. I am not going to let fear turn my students' safe space into something that feels like a threat, even unintentionally. Dominic sat back, absorbing the force of it, and for the first time actually paused instead of immediately defending his position. You're right, he said finally. Tell me what would actually work instead. Rachel's anger softened at the honesty. Increase security around the building's exterior if you're genuinely worried. Don't bring it inside my classroom walls. Done, Dominic said, meaning it. Scene 3 came on the 7th night, when Rachel found him alone on the townhouse's small balcony, a glass of wine he wasn't drinking held loosely in one hand. I had a younger brother, Dominic said before she'd even asked what was wrong. Anthony. 6 years younger than me. He got caught in the middle of a territorial dispute 8 years ago. Nothing to do with him directly, wrong place at the wrong time. I was 3 minutes away when it happened. 3 minutes and I still couldn't get to him in time. His voice cracked just slightly. I've spent 8 years since then building tighter and tighter security around everyone I care about, telling myself that enough control would prevent that kind of loss from ever happening again. And then you saved my life anyway, a total stranger with no security apparatus involved at all. Just kindness. It's made me question everything I thought I understood about protection. Rachel sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. That's not a failure on your part, Dominic. You couldn't have controlled every variable that led to your brother's death. No amount of security fully eliminates that kind of risk. You keep saying things like that, Dominic said, looking at her with something raw and unguarded. Like you actually understand exactly what that guilt costs. I don't understand your specific grief, Rachel admitted. But I understand carrying responsibility for people you love, and feeling like you failed them even when the failure wasn't really yours to prevent. I felt that with my own father for years, before I finally understood his choices were his, not mine to carry. He looked at her, something shifting fully open in his expression. You keep finding exactly the thing I need to hear. I read rooms for a living, Rachel said, something gentle in her voice. It's the same skill whether it's a classroom of 9-year-olds or a grieving man on a balcony. They sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the city lights spreading beyond the balcony, and something passed between them that wasn't yet spoken but was undeniably present. Two people who'd both learned, through different losses, exactly how much courage genuine care required. It was Dominic's assistant, Marco, who broke the moment, appearing at the balcony door, tablet in hand, expression tight. "Boss," he said. "A get-well card arrived at your office today, forwarded from the hospital." I almost tossed it with the rest, but Rachel mentioned something during her visit last week that made me look twice. Rachel's brow furrowed. "What did I say?" "You mentioned the hospital's visitor log from the night of the shooting," Marco said. "Salvatore's signature was on it, time-stamped an hour before he claims he arrived across town for his alibi. I didn't think much of it until I saw this card's handwriting." He held up the card. Rachel studied the looping, distinctive script across the front, comparing it instinctively against the mental image she still carried of that visitor log signature from her earlier brief glance at hospital records. "That's the same handwriting," she said slowly. "I'm certain of it. I have a good memory for handwriting. Comes from years of grading essays and knowing exactly which student wrote which paper before I even checked the name." Dominic went very still. "You're saying Salvatore was actually at the hospital that night, not across town like his alibi claims?" "I'm saying the handwriting matches," Rachel said carefully. "I can't prove intent. But the timeline his alibi depends on doesn't hold up if he was physically present at that hospital." Dominic's expression went cold and absolute, a decade of family loyalty visibly cracking under the weight of what Rachel had just noticed. "Then his alibi was a lie from the beginning," he said quietly. "Which means he was there the night I was shot, exactly when someone tried to kill me." Whatever fragile calm they'd built over the past week had just shattered completely. The confirmation, once Dominic's investigators cross-referenced Rachel's observation against the hospital's full visitor logs and Salvatore's publicly stated alibi, revealed a fabrication too precise to be accidental. He had someone else sign him out early, covering the actual timeline, Marco explained, laying the evidence across Dominic's desk. But the visitor log entry itself, the handwriting Rachel identified, that's genuinely his. He was physically present at the hospital that night, roughly 40 minutes before you were shot 2 blocks away. 40 minutes is enough time to coordinate a hit and establish a false alibi elsewhere, Dominic said, voice flat with barely controlled fury. "My own cousin. Why would he do this?" Rachel asked, sitting across from him, still absorbing the weight of what her offhand observation had unraveled. "Control," Dominic said grimly. "Salvatore's always believed the family's legitimate business interests should have gone to him after my father died, not me. Removing me would have cleared his path considerably." The danger sharpened almost immediately. Salvatore, sensing the net tightening around his fabricated alibi, moved faster than anyone anticipated. Rachel, leaving a late security debrief at Dominic's office, found her path through the parking garage blocked by a man she didn't recognize but whose careful, deliberate stance immediately raised every alarm her instincts carried. "You've been talking to Dominic about handwriting," the man said, his voice low and controlled in a way that sent ice through Rachel's veins. "That's an inconvenient detail for certain people." "Salvatore sent you," Rachel said, backing carefully toward the garage's exit, calculating distance the same way she'd calculate a classroom emergency drill. "Mr. Carbone would like this handled quietly," the man said, closing the distance. No further mention of visitor logs. No further conversations with his cousin about timelines. "I already told Dominic everything I noticed," Rachel said, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage despite her racing heart. "Whatever happens to me now doesn't erase what's already been shared." "Maybe not," the man said. "But it removes the witness who could testify to it directly." He lunged forward and Rachel, drawing on instincts sharpened by years of managing chaotic classroom emergencies and one terrifying week of genuine danger, twisted sideways and slammed her hand against the garage's emergency alarm panel mounted near the elevator. The deafening siren filled the enclosed space, and the man flinched, disoriented, giving Rachel precious seconds to sprint toward the stairwell. Dominic found her minutes later, breathless and shaking but unharmed, his own alarm turning instantly to cold, absolute fury as she recounted what happened. "He sent someone after you directly," Dominic said. "In my own building's parking garage." "He's not going to stop," Rachel said. "Not until this is resolved completely." Dominic's jaw tightened, something resolving fully behind his controlled expression. "Then we resolve it. Tonight." He convened his most trusted advisors within the hour, laying out the full evidence. The falsified alibi, the handwriting match, the attempted attack in the parking garage, and the room's reaction confirmed exactly how difficult the coming decision would be. "He's family," argued Enzo Bellandi, one of Dominic's oldest advisors. "Whatever he's done, exposing him publicly fractures this entire organization. Half the family will side with blood over whatever evidence you present." "And if I don't expose him?" Dominic asked. "He already tried to have Rachel killed tonight in my own building. He tried to kill me once already and nearly succeeded. Silence isn't protecting the family at this point. It's just protecting Salvatore's ability to try again." "There's a family gathering this weekend," Marco said. "Isabella's hosting it. Meant to be a reconciliation, smoothing over the tension since your shooting. If you expose Salvatore there, publicly, in front of everyone who matters, there's no room left for him to spin his way out of it." "That's an enormous risk," Enzo warned. "Public exposure of a family betrayal, in front of everyone whose loyalty you'll need going forward." "I know," Dominic said. "I'm doing it anyway." Rachel, listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "I want to be there," she said. "Absolutely not," Dominic said immediately. "Salvatore already tried to kill you once tonight. Walking you into a room full of his allies isn't protection, it's exactly the opposite. You need my testimony about the handwriting to make this stick in front of witnesses who'll want proof, not just accusation," Rachel said. "Hiding me away doesn't make this safer. It just makes the evidence easier to dismiss as secondhand." Dominic studied her, torn between every protective instinct he had and the plain truth of what she'd said. "If you come," he said finally, "you stay beside me the entire time. No exceptions." "Agreed," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. She reached into her coat pocket, fingers finding the small enamel blood drop pin she'd carried since the day this all began, and pinned it carefully to her collar. A quiet, private reminder of exactly why she'd first gotten pulled into this, and exactly why walking away now had never really been an option. Isabella's reconciliation gathering filled a private banquet room with extended family, longtime associates and careful, watchful tension that made clear everyone present already sensed something beneath the surface of the evening's forced civility. Salvatore, dressed impeccably, greeted guests with practiced ease near the room's entrance, his composure giving no hint of the danger simmering beneath it, until Dominic approached, Rachel close beside him, the assembled evidence in a folder under his arm. "Before this evening continues," Dominic said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "I need to correct something my cousin has been telling this family for weeks." Salvatore's easy smile faltered. "Dominic, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," Dominic said. You told everyone here you were across town the night I was shot. That's not true and Rachel can prove it. The room's ambient conversation dropped into sharp, listening silence. Rachel stepped forward, opening the folder, laying the hospital visitor log and Salvatore's get well card side by side on a nearby table. This is your signature, she said, pointing to the visitor log entry, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I recognized the handwriting from a card you sent to Dominic's hospital room. The same distinctive script, the same specific way you form your capital letters. The timestamp places you at that hospital 40 minutes before Dominic was shot 2 blocks away, not across town like you've told everyone. Salvatore's composure cracked visibly. This is absurd. A schoolteacher's memory of handwriting isn't evidence. It's evidence enough to compare against forensic handwriting analysis, Dominic said, voice going cold and absolute. Which I've already requested. You had someone falsify your official alibi timeline, Salvatore. That takes planning. That takes intent. You don't understand the pressures I've been under, Salvatore said, his voice rising, desperation cutting through his earlier polish. This family owes me the leadership position you inherited. I earned it. You were handed it. You tried to have me killed, Dominic said. And when that failed, you tried to eliminate the one witness who could connect you to it. That's not earning leadership, Salvatore. That's exactly the kind of betrayal that disqualifies you from ever holding it. Salvatore's hand moved toward his jacket, panic overriding calculation. But before he could finish the motion, 2 of Dominic's men, positioned discreetly near the room's exits, closed the distance and restrained him before violence could escalate any further. You're destroying this family over some teacher who happened to donate blood, Salvatore said as security led him away. You're wrong, Dominic said. She's the reason I'm alive to have this conversation at all. You're the one who tried to destroy this family, the moment you decided your own ambition mattered more than the people you were supposed to protect. In the charged, stunned silence that followed, Isabella crossed the room slowly, her expression a devastating mixture of grief and vindication. I need to see the evidence myself, she said quietly. Before I believe my own son did this. Dominic showed her everything. The handwriting comparison, the falsified alibi timeline, the account of the parking garage attack, and watched his aunt's composure crumble under the accumulated weight of proof too thorough to dismiss. He's still my son, Isabella said finally, tears finally breaking through her careful control. But I can't excuse this. Not after everything he's done. The aftermath fractured the family exactly as Enzo had warned it would. Several relatives, unwilling to accept evidence over blood loyalty, distanced themselves from Dominic entirely in the following weeks. Isabella, devastated but resolute, supported Dominic's decision to turn Salvatore over to law enforcement rather than handle the betrayal within the family's own private justice. A choice that cost Dominic considerably more standing among the old guard than a quieter, internal resolution would have. You could have handled this privately, Rachel told him, finding him alone in his office 2 days later, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before. Kept it within the family. Protected your standing with the relatives who are angry about the public exposure. I could have, Dominic admitted. For years I watched my family handle betrayals quietly, internally, protecting reputation over accountability. That same instinct is probably what let Salvatore believe he could get away with trying to kill me in the first place. The assumption that consequences would always stay contained, manageable, hidden from anyone who mattered. He met her eyes directly. Watching you refuse to stay quiet about that handwriting, watching you insist on being present tonight instead of hiding safely away, you taught me something I should have understood a long time ago. Accountability that only happens in private isn't really accountability at all. It's just a more comfortable form of the same silence that let this happen. Rachel was quiet a long moment, weighing everything he'd admitted against the fierce independence she'd fought to protect throughout this entire ordeal. I need you to understand something too, she said finally. I'm not interested in staying close to you because I feel like I owe you anything for exposing Salvatore or protecting me or any of it. I gave blood because someone needed it. I noticed that handwriting because paying attention is just who I am. I'm not going to let gratitude replace something that actually has to be chosen freely, not even for you. That's exactly what I want you to understand too, Dominic said. Whatever you choose next, it has to be entirely yours. Salvatore's formal arrest came 3 days later, The handwriting evidence corroborated by forensic analysis exactly as Dominic had predicted, the falsified alibi collapsing entirely under scrutiny it could never survive. His bid for control of the family's interests ended permanently, replaced by formal charges that would keep him from ever threatening Dominic or Rachel again. The cost to Dominic remained real and significant. Relatives who'd sided with Salvatore over truth, a fractured trust within the organization that would take years to fully rebuild, the particular grief of losing family to consequence rather than distance or death. Was it worth it? Rachel asked him, sitting together in his office as the last of the immediate legal proceedings wound down. Every part of it, Dominic said without hesitation. I'd rather have a smaller, honest family than one built on the same silence that let Salvatore believe violence would go unanswered. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood in her classroom after the final bell, grading papers in the quiet, ordinary rhythm that had anchored her through everything that came before it. A rhythm she'd fought hard to protect throughout the entire, dangerous unraveling of Salvatore's betrayal. Dominic had offered her, more than once, a life of complete comfort and permanent security. Full financial independence, an end to the modest apartment and careful budgeting she'd managed her entire adult life, protection that would never again require her to navigate danger on a teacher's ordinary income. She turned it down every time, gently but firmly, exactly as she'd promised herself she would. You could stop worrying about money entirely, Dominic said, finding her at her classroom desk one evening, waiting patiently while she finished grading. You've more than earned that after everything this cost you. I know, Rachel said. But this classroom is mine. Built by me over years without anyone handing it to me. I'm not interested in trading that away just because an easier option exists now. Then what do you want instead? I want you to stop offering me an easier version of my life like there's a version of my answer where I eventually say yes, Rachel said, though her tone carried more warmth than irritation. I want my independence. I want you in my life, not managing it for me. Those aren't negotiable terms, Dominic. They're just who I am. I know, Dominic said, something soft moving behind his careful expression. I keep offering because some part of me still worries that not offering means I'm not doing enough for you. I'm working on that. She reached into her desk drawer, pulling out the small enamel blood drop pin she'd worn to the family gathering weeks earlier, turning it over in her hands. I almost stopped wearing this, she said. After everything it ended up meaning. I thought about retiring it, keeping it somewhere safe instead. Why didn't you? Because I think it's supposed to keep meaning exactly what it always meant, Rachel said. That ordinary kindness, given without knowing the cost, can still matter more than anyone expects. That's not really about the pin. That's about trusting that showing up for people, even strangers, even without calculating what it might cost you, that's never actually the wrong choice even when it gets complicated. Dominic took her hand gently, the gesture entirely hers to accept or decline. I know I complicated your independence the moment I walked into your life, he said. I've thought about that a lot. Whether protecting you actually helped or whether it just handed you a different, more dangerous version of the same problem. It did complicate things, Rachel admitted honestly. But you also listened every single time I pushed back. That's the difference. You didn't just decide for me and expect gratitude. You let me set the terms even when it clearly would have been easier for you not to. Then let's keep building it that way, Dominic said, together on whatever terms actually work for both of us. She closed the distance between them herself, deliberate and certain, and kissed him. The choice entirely hers, made with eyes open to exactly what it had cost and exactly what it had given her in return. Rachel still donates blood twice a year, still wears that same small enamel pin on donation days, still believes, more firmly now than ever, that an act of kindness given without knowing its cost can end up changing everything, sometimes in ways you could never have predicted when you first rolled up your sleeve. If this story stayed with you, I want to know what you think. Was Rachel right to keep helping Dominic once she understood the danger surrounding him, or should she have walked away the moment she learned exactly who he was? Tell me your honest answer in the comments and why you believe it. If stories about ordinary kindness changing everything resonate with you, subscribe. The next one is coming soon.